The notification sound pierced through my morning coffee like a knife. Payment declined. I stared at my phone screen, watching the words blur as my hands started to shake. The grocery store checkout line stretched behind me, 20 strangers witnessing my humiliation as I fumbled for another card. Payment declined. My stomach dropped into that familiar abyss of dread. This wasn't happening, not again, not after everything we'd built together. I drove home in silence, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The house sat there like it always had, with its perfect lawn and painted shutters, but something felt different, colder. Like the air itself had turned against me. David was in his office when I walked in, typing away at his computer with that mechanical precision he'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't even acknowledge the sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floor we'd chosen together 3 summers ago. The words came out sharper than I intended. My cards were declined. His fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. Click, click, click. Each keystroke felt like a nail being hammered into something I couldn't see yet. I canceled them. 3 words, delivered like he was commenting on the weather or asking me to pass the salt. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. You what? Now he looked up. Those blue eyes I'd fallen in love with 18 years ago had turned to ice. You heard me, Sarah. The cards are canceled, all of them. The room started to tilt sideways. I gripped the doorframe to keep myself steady. David, what are you talking about? Those are my cards, joint accounts. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was some kind of specimen under a microscope. Joint accounts that I opened, joint accounts that I fund. My name first on everything. His voice carried that particular brand of cruelty that only comes from someone who knows exactly where to aim the knife. Did you really think you had any power here? The building held its breath. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause its relentless ticking. I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago. The woman who would have crumpled right here, right now. Who would have begged and pleaded and promised to be better, to be smaller, to take up less space in her own life. But that woman had died quietly, gradually, over the course of 1,000 small betrayals. What stood in her place was something sharper. Something that had been planning for this exact moment longer than David could possibly imagine. So this is it then. My voice came out steady, which surprised both of us. This is how you want to play it? David's smile was the kind you see on predators right before they strike. Sarah, let me spell this out for you since you seem confused. You have no job, you have no credit cards. You have no bank accounts in your name, you have nothing. He gestured around the office like he was showcasing a museum exhibit. This house? My name on the deed. The car you drove home? My name on the title. Your entire existence depends on my generosity. 15 years. 15 years I'd organized his life, managed his calendar, entertained his colleagues, smiled at his mother's passive-aggressive comments at family dinners. 15 years of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. And why exactly are you doing this now? The question hung in the air like smoke from a recently fired gun. David's expression shifted, just slightly, a crack in that perfect mask of control. I think we both know this marriage has run its course, Sarah. We're different people than we were when we started this. I need freedom to explore who I'm becoming. Freedom to explore who he was becoming. The euphemism was so perfectly David. Clean, clinical, designed to avoid the messiness of actual truth. Her name is Jessica, isn't it? The crack widened. For just a moment, I saw the boy I'd married. Scared, caught, searching for an escape route. This isn't about anyone else. This is about us. About what we've become. Liar. The word sat heavy in my chest, but I didn't say it out loud. No point in giving him the satisfaction of my anger. Not yet. So you're just going to leave me with nothing? After everything I've given up for this marriage? David stood up from his desk, smoothing down his shirt with those careful, measured movements he used when he wanted to appear reasonable. Sarah, I'm not the villain here. You'll have time to figure things out. Find a place to stay, get a job, start over. People do it every day. Start over. At 43. With no recent work experience, no credit, no savings in my name. The beautiful generosity of a man who'd spent 15 years systematically dismantling my independence. I watched him gather his papers, preparing to leave for work like this was just another Tuesday morning. Like he hadn't just detonated my entire world before his first cup of coffee. How long have you been planning this? The question stopped him halfway to the door. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. Planning what? The innocence in his voice was almost artistic. This whole thing, David, the financial isolation, making sure everything was in your name. How long have you been setting this up? He turned then, and for the first time that morning, his mask slipped completely. What looked back at me was pure calculation. Cold, methodical planning masquerading as spontaneous decision-making. Does it matter? It did matter. It mattered because it meant every birthday dinner, every anniversary gift, every moment of tenderness over the past year had been performed by someone already planning my destruction. It mattered because I'd been living with a stranger who'd been studying me like an enemy to be defeated. But I didn't tell him any of that. No, I said quietly. I suppose it doesn't. David left for work 20 minutes later. I stood at the living room window, watching his Tesla pull out of the driveway with that silent efficiency he prided himself on. Everything about David was efficient, including the way he just disposed of his wife. The house settled into silence around me. 15 years of shared mornings, shared coffee, shared newspapers spread across the kitchen table. All of it reduced to this hollow quiet that pressed against my eardrums like deep water. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt like a museum of a life I'd never actually lived. The furniture we'd picked out together. The photos from vacations where we'd still been able to pretend we liked each other. The wedding picture on the mantel where two young people smiled at a future they couldn't possibly have imagined. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Lisa. Coffee this morning? You sound different in your voice messages lately. Lisa, the one person who'd never believed David's charm, who'd spent 15 years watching me disappear into his shadow and biting her tongue because she knew I wasn't ready to hear it. I typed back quickly. Rain check? Having a weird morning. The response came immediately. Everything okay? Was everything okay? My husband had just revealed himself as a sociopath, canceled my financial existence, and was presumably planning to move his girlfriend into our house before my side of the bed was even cold. Perfect. Everything's perfect. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Lisa knew that tone. She'd been hearing variations of it for years whenever I tried to convince her that David's latest controlling behavior was actually thoughtfulness, that his criticism was actually helpful feedback, that his gradually shrinking tolerance for my opinions was actually him helping me become more decisive. Call me later. I mean it. I set the phone down and walked into David's office. His desk was exactly as organized as everything else in his life. Pens in their designated holder, papers sorted by priority. Computer closed but positioned at the precise angle that showed he'd be back to continue his conquest of whatever small corner of the corporate world he was dominating this week. I sat in his chair for the first time in 15 years. The leather was expensive, imported from Italy if I remembered his bragging correctly. Everything in this room was expensive. The artwork on the walls. The first edition books he'd never read but displayed because they signaled intelligence. The crystal paperweight that had belonged to his grandfather. This was David's kingdom, the place where he made the decisions that controlled our life together, where he planned this morning's execution. But there was something David didn't know about his kingdom. I reached behind his desk, feeling along the back of the bottom drawer until my fingers found the small silver key taped exactly where I'd left it 2 years ago. My hands were steady now, strangely calm. Like I'd been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. The safety deposit box key felt warm against my palm. David thought he knew everything about our finances. He thought he'd been clever, putting everything in his name, controlling every account, every asset, every pathway to independence. He thought he'd reduced me to nothing. What David didn't know was that nothing had been exactly the right place to start building something. 5 years ago, almost to the day, I'd stood in a bank lobby holding a cashier's check for $8,000. The settlement from my grandmother's estate. The one inheritance David hadn't known about because it had come through my mother's side, and he'd long since stopped pretending to care about my family. $8,000. Not enough to change my life dramatically, but enough to open doors David couldn't see. I'd walked into that bank as Sarah Mitchell, wife of David Mitchell, invisible extension of his financial empire. I'd walked out as Sarah Jane Harrison, my maiden name resurrected for the first time since our wedding. A woman with her own account at a bank across town where David had no relationship, no influence, no knowledge. Over 5 years, 8,000 had become something else entirely. The drive to the bank felt like traveling through a dream. Everything looked the same but felt different, like someone had shifted the entire world 3 degrees to the left when I wasn't paying attention. Martha Chen smiled when I walked into the branch. She'd been my contact person for 5 years, the only person who knew about the account. Professional, discreet, never asking questions about why a married woman needed banking services her husband couldn't access. "Mrs. Harrison," she said warmly, "I wasn't expecting you today. Is everything all right?" The question almost broke me. When was the last time someone had asked if I was all right and actually wanted an honest answer? "I need to access my safety deposit box, and I think it's time we talked about liquidating some assets." Martha's expression shifted subtly. She'd seen enough women in her 20-year banking career to recognize the tone, the careful control masking everything that wanted to scream. "Of course. Let me get the signature cards and we'll head downstairs." The safety deposit box was small, unassuming, the kind of thing that could hold a few documents, some jewelry, maybe a small amount of emergency cash. Nothing that would change anyone's life. Except it wasn't emergency cash in the manila envelope. It was documentation of the most elaborate financial plan I'd never intended to create. 5 years of babysitting the neighbors' kids while David worked late. 5 years of selling my artwork at local craft fairs under my maiden name. 5 years of doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses that paid cash, that didn't report to anyone David might encounter in his corporate ecosystem. 5 years of every dollar I'd managed to earn being funneled into investments David couldn't trace, couldn't access, couldn't control. The statements stared back at me like proof of a life I'd been living in secret. Index funds, municipal bonds. A small but growing portfolio that had turned my grandmother's $8,000 into something approaching real money. $87,000. Not enough to be rich, not enough to never worry again, but enough to disappear if I needed to. Enough to rent an apartment, buy a car, start over without begging anyone for permission. Enough to survive what David had planned for me. But as I sat in that small windowless room below the bank, surrounded by the quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of business being conducted upstairs, I realized I didn't want to just survive. I wanted David to understand exactly what he'd underestimated. Martha was waiting when I returned to her desk, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was prepared to help with whatever came next. "Mrs. Harrison, what can I do for you today?" I sat down across from her, the manila envelope resting in my lap like a weapon I was learning how to use. "I need to make some changes to my account, and I need to understand my options for wire transfers." "What kind of changes are we talking about?" The plan formed as I spoke, pieces clicking together with the satisfying precision of a lock that had finally found its key. "I want to set up automatic payments, regular monthly transfers to cover specific bills, starting immediately." Martha pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. "Which bills?" "The mortgage payment on 1,247 Elm Street, property taxes for the same address, homeowner's insurance, utilities." I paused, watching her write. Everything needed to maintain ownership and habitability of a home. She looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to ask, is this property in your name?" "No, it's in my husband's name." I met her eyes. "For now." Understanding flickered across Martha's face. She'd seen this before. Women preparing for wars they hoped never to fight, building life rafts they prayed never to need. "How long would you want these payments to continue?" I thought about David's arrogance, his certainty that I had no options, no resources, no ability to fight back. I thought about Jessica, whoever she was, getting ready to move into the house I'd maintained for 15 years. "Let's say 5 years to start. We can always extend if necessary." The numbers worked out perfectly. $87,000, carefully managed, could cover the mortgage and essential bills on our house for approximately 5 years. Not extravagantly, but adequately, long enough for a lot of things to change. Long enough for David to discover that the wife he dismissed as powerless had been quietly ensuring he couldn't make her homeless. Martha finished setting up the automatic transfers with the efficiency of someone who understood the urgency without needing explanations. Each monthly payment would go out precisely on time, keeping the house functional and legally protected, creating a paper trail that would be very difficult for David to disrupt. "Is there anything else you need today, Mrs. Harrison?" I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Actually, yes. I need to transfer some money into my checking account. I'm going to need cash for moving expenses. $20,000. Enough to rent a decent apartment, pay deposits, buy furniture. Enough to disappear completely if that's what I chose to do." But disappearing wasn't what I had in mind. The drive home felt different now, like I was returning to a battlefield where the terms had suddenly shifted in my favor. David's house looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. Just a building where a man lived who was about to learn that his wife had been playing a much longer game than he'd imagined. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. In a few hours, David would come home expecting to find me broken, desperate, begging for his mercy. Instead, he was going to find someone who had just guaranteed he couldn't use homelessness as a weapon. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi Sarah, this is Jessica. David gave me your number. I wanted to reach out before things got too awkward. Hope we can be mature about this transition." I stared at the phone for a full minute, reading the message 3 times. The audacity was breathtaking. David had given his girlfriend my phone number so she could manage the awkwardness of stealing my husband. I typed back slowly, choosing each word with surgical precision. "Hi Jessica. Thanks for reaching out. I think there might be some confusion about the timeline of this transition. David may not have explained the full situation. The house payments are covered for the next 5 years, so you'll have plenty of time to figure out alternative arrangements. Best wishes." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. "What do you mean the house payments are covered?" I smiled at my phone screen. "Ask David. He's very good with financial details." No response came. I could picture Jessica staring at her phone, trying to decode what she'd just read, trying to figure out if the dismissed wife had just delivered a threat or a promise. The answer was both. I spent the afternoon packing methodically. Not everything, not frantically, just the things that mattered. Photo albums David never looked at, books he'd criticized as a waste of time, art supplies he'd convinced me I didn't need anymore. The suitcase felt like freedom in portable form. At 4:30, I called my sister. "Lisa, remember how you've been telling me for 15 years that I could stay with you if I ever needed to?" Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "Sarah, what happened?" "David canceled my credit cards this morning, told me I have nothing and need to start over." My voice was steady, factual, "so I'm starting over." "Oh honey, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you?" "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. But I do need a place to stay while I look for an apartment." Of course you can stay here. As long as you need." Lisa paused. "Sarah, can I ask you something? You sound different, not broken. I was expecting you to sound broken." I looked around the bedroom I'd shared with David for 15 years. Everything in it was expensive, chosen by him, arranged according to his aesthetic preferences. None of it had ever felt like mine. Maybe I was already broken, and this morning just swept away the pieces. I heard my sister take a breath. "Well, whoever you are now, I like her voice better." David's key in the front door sounded like a countdown timer reaching 0. I was sitting in the living room when he walked in, my suitcase by the door, my purse in my lap, waiting calmly like someone with a plan instead of someone whose world had just ended. He stopped short when he saw the luggage. I watched him process the scene, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd expected to find. "Going somewhere?" "Staying with Lisa for a while. Until I find my own place." David set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, falling into his normal after-work routine like this was any other day. That's probably for the best. Give us both some space to think clearly. Space to think clearly. As if this morning's ambush had been an emotional outburst instead of a calculated attack years in the making. David, I got an interesting text today. He was pouring himself a scotch, his back to me, but I saw his shoulders tense. Oh? From Jessica. She wanted to introduce herself, make sure things weren't too awkward during the transition. The scotch bottle clinked against the glass. David's hand wasn't quite as steady as he wanted me to believe. Sarah, I know this is hard, but eventually you'll understand this is better for both of us. I'm sure you're right. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. I do have one question, though. He turned around, his face carefully arranged into an expression of patient condescension. What's that? How exactly were you planning to explain to Jessica that you can't actually pay for this house? The color drained from David's face like water flowing out of a broken dam. What are you talking about? I picked up my suitcase, testing its weight, perfectly manageable, everything I needed to start over. The mortgage payments, David. The property taxes. Homeowner's insurance. All those pesky bills that keep a house from being foreclosed on or condemned. I smiled, feeling my grandmother's strength flowing through my voice. I've been paying those bills for 5 years. Every month. From my own accounts. David's scotch glass hit the coffee table hard enough to crack. That's impossible. You don't have accounts. You don't have money. You're right. Sarah Mitchell doesn't have accounts or money. But Sarah Harrison has been quite industrious for the past 5 years. I watched understanding dawn across his face like a sunrise over a battlefield. All those years I'd been smaller, quieter, more accommodating. He'd thought it was defeat, turned out it was strategy. You can't do this. His voice had gone up an octave. This is my house. Your house that you can't afford without my income covering the major expenses. Your house that Jessica is probably very excited to move into. I walked toward the door, then paused. You might want to have a conversation with her about whether her income can cover those bills. Though I suspect she may have some questions about the financial stability of a man who just made himself homeless. David followed me to the door, his confident stride replaced by something closer to stumbling. Sarah, wait, we can work this out, we can talk about this. The desperation in his voice was new. David never begged. David never pleaded. David was always the one with the power, the control, the ability to determine terms. There's nothing to work out. You were very clear this morning about what you wanted. I opened the front door, breathing in the cool evening air. You wanted me to have nothing. Congratulations. You've discovered what nothing actually looks like. You can't just leave me with bills I can't pay. I turned back to look at my husband one last time. 15 years of marriage reduced to this moment in our doorway, him finally understanding that the woman he'd underestimated had been playing a longer game. Watch me. The door closed behind me with the satisfying click of a lock falling into place. I drove to Lisa's house in complete silence. No music, no radio, just the sound of my breathing and the engine humming its steady rhythm. 5 years of planning had led to this moment. 5 years of being invisible had made me powerful. Lisa was waiting on her front porch when I pulled into her driveway, like she'd been standing guard for the past hour. She hugged me before I could say anything, holding on longer than either of us expected. Are you really okay? She asked when she finally let go. I thought about the question seriously. This morning I'd been married to a man who controlled every aspect of my financial existence. Tonight I was single, homeless, and starting over at 43. I think okay might be exactly the right word. We sat on her porch swing as the sun set, not talking much, just existing in the space between my old life and whatever came next. My phone buzzed occasionally with texts I didn't bother reading. David, probably. Maybe Jessica. Possibly lawyers. All of it could wait until tomorrow. Can I ask you something? Lisa finally said. How long have you been planning this? I thought about that safety deposit box key, taped behind David's desk for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. I thought about every craft fair, every babysitting job, every dollar carefully hidden away like seeds planted in secret soil. I don't think I was planning it at all. I think I was just surviving, and it turned out survival looked a lot like preparation. The next morning brought consequences delivered through David's lawyer. Lisa handed me her phone over coffee, her expression grim. "You need to read this email." The legal language was dense, threatening, designed to intimidate someone who didn't understand that threats were only powerful if the person making them held better cards. "In essence," I said after reading it twice, "David's attorney is threatening to sue me for theft unless I stop making the mortgage payments." "Can they do that?" I laughed, surprising both of us. "Lisa, think about what you just asked me. David's lawyer is threatening to sue me unless I stop paying David's bills for him." Understanding flickered across her face. "That's insane." "That's desperation." My phone rang, David's number. "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice had lost all its morning confidence. He sounded tired, confused, like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "I don't think we do. The lawyer says what you're doing is illegal, financial manipulation, fraud." "David, I'm paying your mortgage. How exactly is that fraud?" Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, trying to construct an argument that made sense even to him. "You're manipulating the situation, using money to control me." The irony was so perfect it felt like poetry. Interesting perspective. "Tell me, how long were you planning this morning's financial ambush?" More silence. "Sarah, listen to me. If you stop the payments now, we can work something out. Mediation, counseling, we can fix this." "David, you told me this marriage had run its course. You told me you needed freedom to explore who you're becoming." I walked to Lisa's window, looking out at her garden where flowers bloomed in cheerful defiance of everything complicated about human relationships. "I'm just giving you the space you requested." "I didn't mean it like this." "How did you mean it?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a recently fired gun. David had meant it exactly like this. He'd meant to destroy me financially and emotionally, then move Jessica into our house like I'd never existed. The only part he hadn't planned for was the possibility that I might fight back. "Look, maybe we were hasty this morning. Maybe we should try counseling first, work through our issues before making any permanent decisions." Counseling. Now he wanted counseling. After 15 years of dismissing my suggestions that we get help, after years of telling me our problems would resolve themselves if I just learned to be less sensitive, less demanding, less difficult to live with. "I think the permanent decisions were made this morning when you canceled my credit cards. I can restore those, today, right now." "David, do you understand what you're offering me? Access to credit that you control. Credit you can cancel again anytime you decide I'm not behaving appropriately." "That's not what I meant." "That's exactly what you meant." I hung up before he could respond. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. David would call with increasingly desperate offers: counseling, a trial separation instead of divorce, a post-nuptial agreement that gave me some financial security. Each conversation revealed more about his situation. Jessica was asking questions about his finances. Her friends were wondering why her successful boyfriend couldn't afford to maintain a house without his estranged wife's help. David's pride, that carefully constructed image of control and success, was crumbling in real time. But the most interesting call came on Thursday. "Sarah, I'll give you the house." I was helping Lisa organize her basement, sorting through boxes of memories that had accumulated over decades of living in one place. Normal people problems. The kind of minor chaos that felt luxurious after years of living in David's perfectly controlled environment. "You'll give me what?" "The house. I'll sign it over to you. Put it in your name. You can have it." I sat down on Lisa's stairs, trying to process what I was hearing. "David, why would you do that?" "Because I can't afford it without you. And I can't afford to have people know I can't afford it." There it was. The truth stripped of all his careful language and strategic positioning. David's entire identity was built on the appearance of success, and I was threatening the foundation of his self-image. "What about Jessica?" "Jessica is. She's reconsidering the timeline of our relationship." Of course she was. Jessica had probably done the math on dating a man who couldn't pay his own mortgage and decided the romance wasn't quite as appealing as she'd initially thought. "David, I need to ask you something. and I want an honest answer. Okay. How long have you been planning to leave me? The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of anniversary dinners where he'd already decided our marriage was over. 2 years of birthday gifts chosen by someone planning my abandonment. 2 years of living with a stranger who was studying me like an opponent to be defeated. And the financial control? Moving everything into your name? I thought it would make things cleaner, easier. Easier meaning he could dispose of me without complications. Cleaner meaning I wouldn't have resources to fight back or make his new life inconvenient. David, I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in making this easier for you. Sarah, please. I know I handled this wrong. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. No, we can't. I stood up, feeling my grandmother's strength in my spine. You spent 2 years planning to destroy me financially and emotionally. You canceled my credit cards to make me homeless. You gave my phone number to your girlfriend so she could manage the awkwardness of my disposal. I'm sorry. You're not sorry, David. You're embarrassed. You're sorry that your plan backfired. You're sorry that the woman you underestimated turned out to be playing a longer game. What do you want from me? The question I'd been waiting for. The moment when David finally understood that he was no longer controlling the terms of our relationship. I want you to live with the consequences of your choices. I want you to explain to everyone who asks why your wife is paying your mortgage from her own apartment across town. I want you to figure out how to afford the life you built without the woman whose unpaid labor made it possible. For how long? I smiled, thinking about the automatic payments that would continue for the next 5 years, keeping David's house functional while making it impossible for him to forget what he'd lost. As long as it takes. The divorce papers arrived the following week, delivered by a process server who apologized for interrupting my lunch with Lisa. David was offering me almost nothing. A small settlement that wouldn't cover 6 months of rent anywhere decent, no claim to the house, no ongoing support. The bare minimum required by law from a man who was still trying to pretend he held all the cards. I read through the documents while Lisa made angry noises across the kitchen table. He can't be serious, she said. 15 years of marriage, and he's offering you what amounts to pocket change. He's serious. I flipped through the pages, noting the careful legal language designed to make his offer sound reasonable. David still thinks he's negotiating from a position of strength. Are you going to fight it? I thought about the automatic mortgage payments that would continue for 5 years whether David liked it or not. I thought about the apartment I'd found across town, small but bright, with windows that faced east toward the sunrise. I thought about the freelance bookkeeping business I was building, the art supplies I'd unpacked for the first time in years, the slow, careful work of rebuilding a life that actually belonged to me. I'm going to respond. My counter-proposal was delivered to David's lawyer the next day. It was simple, elegant, and completely devastating to everything David thought he understood about our situation. I wanted the house, not half the house, not a portion of the proceeds from selling the house, the entire house, transferred into my name, free and clear. In exchange, I would discontinue the mortgage payments that were currently keeping his credit rating intact and his home from foreclosure. David called within an hour of his lawyer receiving the documents. This is insane, Sarah. You can't just take my house. I'm not taking your house, David. I'm offering to trade my ongoing financial support for ownership of the asset I'm supporting. It's worth 4 times what you've paid in mortgage payments. Interesting perspective. How much is it worth to you if I stop making those payments next month? The silence told me everything I needed to know. David had done the math. Without my contributions, he couldn't afford the house. With foreclosure proceedings, his credit would be destroyed, his professional reputation damaged, his carefully constructed life reduced to ruins. You planned this, he said finally. No, David, you planned this. I just planned better. The negotiations took 3 months. David's lawyers tried every strategy they could imagine. Threats of fraud charges that never materialized. Claims that my actions constituted financial abuse that made their own legal team uncomfortable. Demands for psychological evaluations that revealed more about David's state of mind than mine. In the end, the resolution was exactly what I'd proposed. The house transferred into my name. The automatic payments discontinued. David's financial independence finally achieved, along with the responsibility that came with it. I signed the papers in the same bank where I'd opened my secret account 5 years earlier. Martha Chen witnessed my signature, smiling in the way that meant she understood exactly what she was seeing. "Congratulations, Mrs. Harrison," she said when everything was finished. "It's been quite a journey. Thank you for making it possible." "You made it possible. I just provided the banking services." I drove to the house that evening, my house now, and sat in the driveway for a few minutes, looking at the building where I'd spent 15 years of my life. The key still worked, of course. Some things don't change just because the ownership papers have been signed. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it 3 months earlier. David had moved out the week before, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind the furniture, the artwork, the carefully curated aesthetic of a life we'd built together. The silence was different now. Not empty or lonely, but peaceful. Like the house itself was finally able to breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard you got the house. Guess you weren't as helpless as David thought, Jay." Jessica. Still in touch, apparently still processing how badly she'd misread the situation. I typed back. Turns out helpless was just another word for patient. I never heard from her again. The house felt different with just me in it. Lighter somehow, like it had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I spent the first week just walking through rooms, remembering who I'd been in each space, imagining who I might become. The office where David had delivered his ultimatum became my art studio. The dining room where we'd hosted dinner parties for his colleagues became a workspace for my growing bookkeeping business. The bedroom we'd shared was transformed into something entirely my own, decorated with colors David had always vetoed as too bold, too bright, too much. 6 months later, Lisa found me painting in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten could be opened. "You look different," she said, settling at the table with her coffee. "Different how?" "Like yourself, but more so." I considered this, adding blue to the canvas where I'd been experimenting with abstract landscapes. I think maybe I spent so many years being less that I forgot what more felt like. "Do you ever regret it, the way you handled everything?" The question surprised me. Which part? The secret planning, the hidden money, the financial warfare. Lisa gestured around the kitchen, taking in the evidence of my victory. "Some people might say you were manipulative." I set down my brush and looked at my sister. "Lisa, David spent 2 years planning to leave me homeless and penniless. He canceled my credit cards to force my dependence on his mercy. He gave my phone number to his girlfriend so she could manage the awkwardness of my disposal." I picked up the brush again, adding green to the blue in careful, measured strokes. "I spent 5 years earning and saving money to ensure I couldn't be destroyed by someone else's cruelty. Which one of us was manipulative?" Point taken. "Besides," I added, working on a section that looked like sky or water or possibility, "I didn't manipulate anyone. I just refused to be controlled." My phone rang that evening as I was cleaning brushes in the kitchen sink. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Sarah, this is Tom Collins. I used to work with David at Morrison Associates." David's former colleague. I remembered him from company parties. A quiet man with kind eyes who'd always seemed uncomfortable with the way David talked about me when he thought I wasn't listening. "Hello, Tom. How are you?" "I'm well. Thanks. Listen, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Lisa's husband. They're neighbors, and he mentioned you were doing freelance bookkeeping now." "I am. My wife and I are starting a small business, nothing fancy, just a craft store downtown. But we need someone to handle the books, and honestly, after watching how you managed David's social climbing for all those years, I figure you could probably organize anything." I laughed, remembering the dinner parties where I'd smiled pleasantly while David explained my limitations to his colleagues, how I was better with domestic matters than professional ones, how my talents lay in supporting rather than leading. "I'd be happy to help. When would you like to meet?" "Would Monday work? My wife makes incredible coffee." Monday morning found me sitting in a sunny cafe with Tom and his wife Rebecca, discussing cash flow projections and inventory management like the professional I'd never been allowed to become during my marriage. "Sarah," Rebecca said as we wrapped up our meeting, "I have to ask. We heard about the divorce, and honestly, we were all worried about you." David made it sound like you couldn't function independently. David said a lot of things that turned out not to be true. Tom smiled, including his claim that you had no head for business. "This financial plan you've outlined is more sophisticated than anything our last accountant produced." I gathered my papers, thinking about all the years I'd been dismissed as David's pretty but impractical wife, good for organizing social events and decorating houses, but not capable of real work. I think maybe independence was something I needed to practice in private before I could do it in public. 6 months into my new life, I was managing books for 12 small businesses and had a waiting list that stretched into the following year. The art studio was producing paintings that a local gallery had agreed to display. The house was fully mine, legally and emotionally, transformed into something that reflected my actual tastes instead of compromises I'd made to keep peace. David called on a Tuesday morning in spring, his number appearing on my phone for the first time in months. "Sarah, I hope I'm not bothering you." His voice sounded different, smaller, somehow, less certain of its own authority. "What can I do for you, David?" I wanted to apologize for how I handled everything, for what I put you through. I was in my garden, planting tomatoes in soil I'd spent weeks preparing. My hands were dirty, my knees were muddy, and I felt more grounded than I had in years. "I appreciate that. I also wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. The planning, the control, the way I tried to leave you with nothing." He paused, and I could hear traffic in the background, the sound of someone calling from wherever his life had led him. "I was cruel, deliberately cruel." "Yes, you were. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and that I'm working on figuring out how to be a better person." I pressed soil around a tomato plant, thinking about the years we'd spent together, the good parts and the bad parts, and how all of it had led to this moment of unexpected honesty. "David, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy with the choices you made?" The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "No, I'm not happy. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was afraid it wasn't enough, because I thought I deserved more than what I had. And now? Now I understand that more is something you build with someone, not something you take from them." After he hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching clouds move across the sky above my house. David's apology didn't change anything that had happened between us. Didn't erase the cruelty, or the betrayal, or the 2 years he'd spent planning my destruction. But it confirmed something I'd suspected all along. The woman he'd tried to reduce to nothing had been the strongest person in our marriage. The woman he'd dismissed as dependent and powerless had been capable of building a life that didn't need him at all. That evening, I called Lisa. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked. "David's call, I mean." "Grateful," I said, surprising both of us. "Grateful?" I was painting again, working on a piece that looked like sunrise, or maybe freedom, gold and orange spreading across canvas in ways that felt like hope. Grateful that he showed me who he really was. Grateful that his cruelty forced me to discover my own strength. Grateful that his attempt to destroy me actually set me free. That's a very generous way to look at it. I'm not being generous. I'm being honest. I added red to the gold, watching colors blend and separate and create something entirely new. David tried to write me out of my own story. Instead, he gave me the motivation to write a better one. 2 years later, I stood in my living room, which had been transformed into a temporary art gallery for my first solo show. Friends and clients and neighbors moved through spaces that had once been David's kingdom, admiring paintings that captured the landscape of rebuilding a life from scratch. Martha Chen stood in front of a piece I'd titled Compound Interest, a complex abstract that somehow managed to capture the way small investments grow into something powerful when given enough time and protection. "Mrs. Harrison," she said, "this is remarkable. The way you've transformed that experience into something beautiful." Thank you for making it possible. The banking, I mean. The foundation that made everything else possible. You don't give yourself enough credit. I provided services. You provided the vision. Tom and Rebecca arrived with a group of other small business owners I'd worked with over the past 2 years. People who knew me as Sarah the professional, Sarah the artist, Sarah the woman who could solve complex financial problems and create beauty in her spare time. Sarah, Rebecca said, hugging me tightly, we're so proud of you. Look what you've built. I looked around the room, taking in the evidence of 2 years of careful work. The paintings that emerged from silence and solitude. The business that had grown from secret survival skills into professional expertise. The home that had been transformed from a museum of compromise into a space that reflected my actual self. It's strange, I said. I thought losing my marriage would feel like losing everything. Instead, it felt like finding out everything I'd lost was still there, waiting for me to remember where I'd left it. Lisa appeared beside me, carrying 2 glasses of wine and wearing the expression she saved for moments when she was proud, but trying not to cry. To strong women and long-term planning, she said, raising her glass. To survival that looks like preparation, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I'd restored my living room to its normal configuration, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. She'd stood in a grocery store, humiliated by declined credit cards, believing her husband when he told her she had nothing. She'd driven home, prepared to beg for mercy from someone who saw her as disposable. That woman couldn't have imagined this kitchen, this life, this version of herself, who paid her own mortgage and ran her own business and painted abstract landscapes that somehow captured what freedom looked like from the inside. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw the article about your art show in the local paper. Congratulations. You deserved better than what I gave you, Dee. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. David's opinion of what I deserved was no longer relevant to my life. I finished my tea and walked through my house, turning off lights in rooms that belonged entirely to me. The mortgage was paid off early, thanks to the success of my business. The paintings on the walls were mine. The books on the shelves reflected my actual interests instead of compromises made to avoid conflict. In the bedroom, I paused at the window that faced east, toward the sunrise that came every morning, regardless of who was there to witness it. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new paintings, new opportunities to build on the foundation I'd been constructing in secret for longer than I'd realized. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, in a bed that was mine. In a house that was mine, in a life I'd fought for and won and earned, through the simple, radical act of refusing to be destroyed by someone else's cruelty. The woman who had stood in that grocery store 3 years ago would have called this ending impossible. The woman who turned off the lights and settled into her own peace knew it had been inevitable all along. Some storms come to destroy you, others come to wash away everything that was never really yours in the first place, leaving behind only what's strong enough to survive. I had survived. More than that, I had bloomed.